My name is Savannah Monroe. I'm a state judge in Atlanta. But at my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, I was nothing more than a shadow. No one mentioned me in their speeches, no one looked me in the eye. And yet, when the groom, the man my entire family praised as the new pride of the Monroe name, stepped in front of everyone, he bowed his head, looked directly at me, and said, clearly and deliberately, "Good evening, Judge Monroe." The entire room fell silent. My sister went pale. Have you ever been erased from every story your family tells, only to be recognized by a complete stranger right in front of them? If it were you, would you stay silent or speak up and reclaim your voice? Leave a comment, hit like if this story resonates with you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the journey of how I rewrote my own story. Because after that night, everything started to change. 6 years ago, I was once the child my family had the highest hopes for. The eldest daughter of two prominent doctors in Atlanta, I grew up surrounded by cocktail parties filled with my father's colleagues, late-night calls filled with medical jargon and constant whispers about the Nobel Prize in medicine, as if it was just another family heirloom waiting to be passed down. No one in our lineage had ever strayed from medicine. So when I chose to study law, to fight for people with no names instead of putting on the white coat, I changed everything. I remember that night on my 30th birthday with painful clarity. The party was held in the backyard under tall oak trees, golden lights hanging above us, red wine poured into crystal glasses. My mother wore a navy dress, composed and elegant as always. My father raised his glass, smiling with his mouth, but not with his eyes, asking everyone to quiet down because he had something to say. I thought he might congratulate me, offer some acknowledgement of my chosen path, even just a little. Instead, he turned to me, set his glass down on the granite table, and said in a low, clear voice, like delivering a difficult diagnosis, "From this day on, if you continue down this legal path, defending criminals, protecting the worthless, you are no longer my daughter." Everything around me froze. No one gasped. No one shook their head. My mother sat beside me but didn't move. She adjusted her napkin, eyes downcast, as if her silence could erase her presence from the moment. No one defended me. No one stood. Only Chloe, my younger sister, stood at the far end of the table, still holding her silver fork, smirking with disdain and saying loud enough for all to hear, "Really? A judge for losers?" It felt like a blade sliding across skin. I looked at her. This was the same girl who used to crawl into my bed when our parents fought, who was once so afraid of the dark that I left my nightlight on for a whole year. Now her eyes looked at me like I was something diseased that couldn't be cured. Swallowed everything I wanted to say, every word of defense, every tear, even the anger. All of it lodged in my throat like a stone I couldn't pass. I stood up before dessert was served. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going, if I was okay, if I needed anything. They let me walk away as if I had never existed in that house. I left that garden wearing a black dress my mother had picked for my college graduation. Heels so heavy that every step felt like dragging myself further from the last bit of hope I still had. That night, I drove across half the city, pulled over at a gas station on the edge of town, and cried in the dark between the smell of gasoline and flickering neon. The next morning, I went back to the small apartment I had rented near law school. The degrees on the wall no longer felt like achievements, they looked like questions. Why did you choose this path? I didn't answer myself for a long time, not until I realized I didn't choose it to please them. I chose it because I couldn't stand by and watch others push to the edge, just for not being born into the right family. I chose it because I believe justice shouldn't be reserved for people who gather for Thanksgiving in country clubs. But that night, when they erased me, I stopped believing I had the strength to keep going. It took me nearly a year to stand upright again. Every morning, before walking into court, I had to remind myself why I was doing this. Not for recognition, not out of rebellion, but because I knew what it felt like to be cast aside, and if I could help someone else avoid that pain, I couldn't quit. Even after all the long hearings, the sleepless nights reviewing files, even after putting on the black robe of a judge, one thing never changed. In my family's eyes, I was still the disgrace, a name they wanted erased from every photo, every invitation, every story they told with pride. Until that night at the rehearsal dinner, when a man who shared no blood with me, who knew nothing about the scars I carried, became the first to see me for who I truly was. And in that moment, everything began to shift. For months after I left that birthday party, I barely spoke to anyone outside of work. The apartment I lived in was on the third floor of an old building in South Atlanta. The walls were paper thin. In winter, the wind whistled through the windows. In summer, the heat was so thick I kept a fan running all night just to sleep. There was no balcony, no dishwasher, but there was a desk pushed up against the window, where I spent most nights studying and typing up internship memos. I worked 3 jobs a week, making coffee at a bookstore near campus, typing legal documents at a worn-down law office, and on weekends, helping out in the church's soup kitchen. Some nights I got home close to midnight, feet aching, wrists sore from typing, but I still opened my books. I had promised myself, if my family didn't believe in my path, I would become living proof that they were wrong. Law school taught me statutes and procedures, but what taught me patience and perseverance were the people I met at the church kitchen, those who waited an hour just for a bowl of hot soup. Elderly folks who could barely read, asking for help with eviction notices they didn't understand. The look in their eyes, the way they whispered, "Thank you," through shame and shivers. I knew then I wasn't allowed to break. It was at that little law office where I met the person who changed everything, Judge Charles McKinley. He walked in one March afternoon, wearing a faded gray suit, holding a folder marked urgent edits. I was working the front desk. When I helped him locate a statute in the Georgia code book, he paused, looked at me, and asked, "Still in school or already graduated?" I told him I was preparing for finals. He nodded and left without saying more. 3 weeks later, he called the office, asking for me by name. He told me to apply for a summer clerkship at the Southern District Courthouse, his courthouse. I applied, thinking I had nothing to lose. I got the spot, and that summer I learned more than I had in any classroom. Judge McKinley wasn't gentle. He didn't give easy praise. He handed me impossible cases, made me read every deposition line by line, compare every clause in the law, rewrite legal briefs until my eyes blurred, but he never treated me like a young black woman with no connections. He treated me like a real attorney. At the end of the summer, he said only one sentence: "If you're brave enough to stand in a courtroom, I'll be the first to sit on the bench and give you that chance." After finals, I was offered a clerkship under him. Every day I stepped into that courthouse, I had to choose between trembling and standing tall. Not because I lacked skill, but because I walked into a system where very few people looked like me, and even fewer believed I could sit in the highest seat. I had been there for nearly 4 years when Judge McKinley retired, leaving his seat vacant. Many applied for the position, but I was the only one who knew every case he had presided over, every document he had used to justify his rulings. When the governor appointed me to succeed him, making me one of the youngest state judges in the region's history, I stood at the podium, hand gripping the wooden gavel he left behind, and not a single member of my family was there. I didn't cry. I didn't wait for anyone to call my name from the crowd. I simply bowed my head and took the oath to myself. Justice isn't reserved for the privileged. It belongs to those who dare to claim it and those who dare to protect others. I didn't rise for show. I took that seat so that no one like me would ever have to leave home with nothing, just because the path they chose didn't align with someone else's expectations. From then on, I focused on civil cases. Workers cheated by their employers, women unlawfully terminated, tenants tricked by predatory leases. These weren't high-profile cases. They didn't make headlines or land me in magazine spreads. But I saw the truth in every file. I saw myself in each shaky affidavit and every handwritten plea for help. I saw a world my parents never cared to notice, and I decided it wouldn't disappear in silence, not if I had anything to do with it. That afternoon, I was in my office, finishing up a 27-page decision on a landlord dispute that had dragged on for nearly 2 years. The late afternoon light poured through the window, casting a soft gold across the stacks of paperwork. My clerk knocked, placing a thick envelope on my desk, my family's name embossed in shimmering gold. Next to it, a small note card with handwriting I instantly recognized. I froze for a few seconds, staring at the envelope as a chill crept over me. The last time I saw the Monroe name in gold was when I was removed from the guest list for our third annual family reunion. No explanation, no message. It was as if I had never existed. I carefully opened the envelope. A wedding invitation. The usual format, perfectly laid out, heavy stock paper, a faint perfume lingering in the folds. We are pleased to announce the wedding of Chloe Monroe and Dr. Nathan Reed, April 24th. My sister's name bolded at the center, as if stamped in stone. And me? I was just the recipient. I exhaled slowly, preparing to set the card down, when a small folded note slipped out. Plain white paper, no letterhead, no flourish, just one handwritten line in blue ink. Please come. I miss you. Mom. I read it 3 times. My hands began to tremble. 6 years. Not a single phone call, not a text, not a single explanation. The same woman who used to braid my hair before school, who taught me how to bake cornbread in the winter, had vanished the moment my father disowned me in front of the entire family. She didn't defend me, didn't object, didn't even look me in the eye as I walked out of our backyard. And now she missed me? I laid the note gently on the desk, afraid it might disintegrate if I held it too tightly. My mind spun. My heart, long guarded by walls I built to survive without her, skipped with an old, fragile ache. I was angry. But I was also tired of holding on to bitterness just to stay upright. That night, I came home late, tucked the invitation into a folder, and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't reopen it, but it replayed in my mind as I stood at the sink, washing my hands in the dim yellow light of my kitchen. Chloe was getting married. My sister, the one who once told her friends I pretended to be kind to mask failure, was walking down the aisle with a man I'd never heard of. I don't know why, but standing there in that quiet kitchen, I thought of Judge McKinley. He once told me, "Some people will only respect you when they see you on a high podium. But others, Savannah, no matter where you stand, they'll choose not to see you." He was right. But still, there was a part of me that ached with an old hope, like the faint clink of wind chimes in memory, fragile, but unwilling to go quiet. I sat down, opened my laptop, and typed in Nathan Reed. Dozens of results came up. He had been a resident physician at a community health center in Macon, now working at a private hospital in Buckhead, specializing in pediatrics. A kind face, a calm smile, a flawless resume. I could see why Chloe chose him. I stopped at an old article from 2 years ago. Nathan had testified in court against a hospital accused of denying treatment to uninsured children. The presiding judge that day was me. I stared at the photo in the article. It was blurry, but clear enough. I was seated at the bench, head down, taking notes. Nathan was on the witness stand, hands clasped in front of him. I didn't remember him. I've presided over so many cases, but something stirred inside me. He had stood before me. He had fought for justice, at least that day. And now he was marrying Chloe, the same woman who stood by my parents as they erased me from their lives. I closed the laptop, my chest heavy. It wasn't the wedding that weighed on me, not even the note from my mother. It was the sudden, searing uncertainty. After 6 years, did I want to show up as a symbol of silence, or as a storm that had waited long enough? I couldn't sleep that night. The wind rustled through the old window frame, curtains shifting like the blurry edges of half-formed memories. I sat in the living room, reopened a case file I suspected was connected to Nathan. I remembered that trial. It was big, covered by the press. A group of nurses, mostly women of color and immigrants, had been forced into illegal overtime without pay, threatened with termination if they spoke up. At the time, I was just shy of 33, still in my first year on the bench. The hospital's legal team was relentless, polished, well-funded, spinning arguments about budget cuts and necessary staff reorganization. But when I read those depositions, heard the stories of hands trembling after 16 straight hours on their feet with no breaks, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I flipped to the testimony of the third witness, Dr. Nathan Reed. It was him. Back then he was still a resident, barely into his second year, but he stood up for those nurses. He spoke plainly, said he'd seen it. Exhausted nurses handling emergency surgeries, skipping meals, collapsing from fatigue. He didn't posture or moralize. He just told the truth, calm, direct, unafraid. I remembered being struck by his presence, not because he tried to impress, but because he refused to pretend he hadn't seen injustice. And it was his testimony, along with the records, exhibits, and other witnesses, that helped me deliver a ruling forcing the hospital to pay damages and change its policies. I still remember looking down from the bench as I read the final order. The nurses had tears in their eyes. Nathan stood a few feet back, not joining the celebration. He just smiled softly, like it was simply the right thing to do. I had no idea his name would ever cross into my life again, especially as Chloe's groom. I started digging deeper, pulling up old articles, community outreach reports. In the past 3 years, Nathan had worked with nonprofits, helped run mobile clinics in underserved areas, spoken out against insurance discrimination, all things that ran counter to the values my family held sacred: silence, status, curated relationships, and glossy photos in front of hospitals with brass plaques. So why did Chloe choose him? She always looked down on people who pursued social justice, used to call protests disruptive stunts. Could it be she didn't know what Nathan had done? Or did she know and hide it? I paused at something strange. In every piece of public information Nathan had ever shared, interviews, hospital bios, articles, nowhere did it mention he was engaged to the daughter of the distinguished Monroe doctors. No engagement photos, no flashy announcements like my family usually put out anytime they had a chance to boost their status. Everything was quiet, as if someone deliberately kept him in the dark. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he had never been told that I, the judge who presided over a trial where he once stood for justice, was the sister of the woman he was about to marry. And even more so, that I had been cast out of that family by the same woman along with our parents, like a stain they wanted to scrub away. I closed my eyes, a wave of bitterness rising behind my nose. In the story they were weaving, who was I? The invisible one? The name they had to hide to protect the family image? Or just a silent punctuation mark tucked in a page they never meant to turn back to? That question hovered in the heavy silence of the room. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 2 a.m. I hadn't decided whether I would go or not, but one thing I knew more clearly than ever: if I showed up, I wouldn't walk in as someone they wanted to forget. I would walk in as someone they could no longer ignore. I got a call from my mother on Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the wedding. A strange number lit up my phone screen. I was about to reject it out of habit, but my finger paused when I heard her voice, small and hoarse, like a wound that never fully healed. "Savannah, it's Mom. Would you have dinner with me before the wedding?" Her voice was tight, like a violin string pulled too hard. I didn't answer right away. Too many things couldn't be wrapped up in a question that soft. But then I nodded, as if reaching for a shadow. "Where?" I asked. "Rue," she replied immediately. I let out a dry laugh before ending the call. Of course it was Rue, the upscale French restaurant in Midtown my family always chose when they needed to keep up appearances. A place where conversations were whispered and laughter was just loud enough to sound well-mannered. Perfect for a carefully staged reconciliation. I arrived right on time. My mother was already seated near the window, her hand resting on a still-held glass of white wine. She wore a pale blue dress, her hair pinned neatly back, lips lightly glossed in rose. A woman always composed, as if emotions could be ironed flat. She half stood when she saw me, then sat back down again, unsure if a hug was permitted. I pulled out my chair, set down my purse, and nodded as a greeting. We ordered quickly. I asked for black coffee, no sugar. She ordered a salad, though I knew she would only pick at a few leaves and push the plate away. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. The clink of cutlery and glasses around us filled the space. Finally, she set her fork down, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in 6 years. "I owe you an apology," she said softly, as if afraid of the sound of her own words. "When you left home, we didn't give you a chance to explain." I kept my hands around the coffee cup, said nothing. It was far too late for explanations, but I let her continue. "Your father, he told everyone you had an emotional breakdown, that you quit because you couldn't handle the pressure. He said the only way to protect the family's reputation was to let you vanish." She paused, fingers clutching the napkin in her lap. I didn't agree, but I didn't stop him. I stayed silent. Silence. That word cut sharper than any insult, because that was what broke me back then. Not my father's cruelty, not Chloe's cold smirk, but the silence of the woman who once held my hand the night I admitted I didn't want to be a doctor. I looked at her. Her skin was thinner now, the lines near her eyes trailing toward her temples. She no longer had the strength she once did. "But I didn't soften." "You didn't stop him," I said, voice low but firm. "You let them bury me with lies, then left me to fight through everything a daughter without parents has to face." She didn't argue. Her eyes were glassy. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it on the table between us. "Do you remember the pendant your grandfather left you? The scales of justice. He promised to give it to you after you took your oath." I said nothing. She opened the box. A thin silver chain with a small, finely carved balance scale pendant. I remembered trying it on at 12, and him laughing gently, saying, "You have to grow up and stand firm in reason to be worthy of this." "Your father kept it," she continued. "But I got it back last week. It belongs to you." I picked it up. It was cold, like a drop of frozen water in summer. I didn't say thank you. I didn't ask why she brought it now. I just placed it carefully into my bag, almost afraid it would vanish if I let emotion show. She said nothing else. I didn't want her to. Some things, even if spoken, don't soften the years of loneliness they caused. We ended the meal without touching our entrees. As we walked out, she stayed beside me for a few steps, then stopped. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I hope you won't carry that pain forever." I turned to her quietly, the streetlights soft against her face. "I don't carry it, Mom. I left it behind long ago, but the scar remains, and it always will." I walked ahead, my heels tapping in rhythm, with the soft night breeze curling through the empty street. In my bag, the silver pendant shifted slightly, like an old whisper from the grandfather I lost, reminding me that some things we reclaim not for forgiveness, but to affirm that they were always ours. The rehearsal dinner was held in a grand hall, high-ceilinged, crystal chandeliers glowing from corridor to ballroom, every corner polished and picture-perfect. I arrived on time, neither late nor early. As I stepped inside to the sound of a string quartet playing a gentle symphony, my fingers gripped my purse strap, my thumb brushing the edge of the pendant tucked beneath my collar like an anchor in a sea of unseen currents. A staff member greeted me. "Miss Monroe?" he asked, then led me to a table pressed against the far wall, nearly the furthest from the stage and the bride and groom's table. I sat down and scanned the faces. Small nameplates were placed along the table. I glanced at the people around me, distant relatives I barely recognized, a few I'd met only once in high school. They nodded politely, smiles as thin as early frost. My name wasn't on the speaker list, nor on the family honors program. there was a bolded section. Those who uphold Monroe tradition and elevate our family legacy. Listed beneath were my father, Uncle Martin, State Director of Public Health, Aunt Clarice, a sponsor of a medical scholarship fund, and finally, Chloe, the bride-to-be dedicated to the ideals of medicine. I flipped to the next page, scanning for my name. It wasn't there. Not a single line, not a trace that I had ever belonged. A middle-aged woman sitting to my right leaned in and whispered to her friend, "She hasn't changed much. Still doesn't know how to stay in her place." They both chuckled. Softly, perfectly measured, just loud enough to slice through the air like a finely honed blade. I didn't react. There was no need. I had long grown used to being seen through the dusty lens of their judgments. A glass clinked sharply from the center of the room. Chloe stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone. Her golden hair swept into a classic updo, her champagne-colored dress hugging her frame, her face so perfectly made up it looked nearly emotionless. She smiled gently and glanced around the room. "I want to thank those who have helped us preserve our family's traditions," Chloe said, her voice smooth as silk, every word carefully measured. "Those who chose the path of honor, devoting themselves to medicine, serving the community through care and healing." Applause followed. She paused, then smiled again. "And especially those who haven't been led astray by ambitions that stray from the values the Monroe family has always cherished." I looked up. Chloe's eyes passed over me for a brief moment. No pause, no nod, but I understood. That arrow had a target, and I was the only one in the room who knew exactly where it landed. A second round of applause erupted. A few people at my table nodded in agreement. Uncle Harry, my father's younger brother, took a sip of wine, then leaned slightly toward me, a smirk in his voice. "Looks like the law still hasn't cured that ego problem, huh?" I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to see his face to imagine it. I just took a deep breath and let my shoulders relax. The pendant beneath my dress pressed coolly against my skin, its weight steady, like a quiet rhythm reminding me that I was here, still myself. Nothing stolen from me, only kept out of the light for too long. I stayed in that seat for the rest of the evening, silent as a wall. I didn't join conversations, didn't fake laughter, didn't force myself to be seen. But my heart beat strong, steady, proud. Not because I was trying to be brave, but because I knew no matter how loudly they ignored me, they couldn't erase my presence. I didn't need to be named on elegant printed paper. I didn't need praise from a party designed for optics. I needed only one thing, the truth. And the truth doesn't need permission to exist. Midway through the event, the atmosphere softened. The music shifted to smooth jazz. Guests scattered into small groups, chatting, snapping photos, raising their glasses. I stood quietly by a wall near the floral display, holding a glass of water whose ice had long since melted. The overhead lights cast a soft shimmer across my black dress, catching the hidden gleam of the pendant beneath my collar. I wasn't seeking attention, but I could feel the occasional glance, just enough to confirm I was still standing there, like a shadow without a name. A deep voice sounded behind me, calm, neither rushed nor hesitant. "Judge Monroe?" I turned. Nathan stood there. He wore a charcoal suit, a chestnut tie neatly knotted. Under the chandelier's glow, his face didn't look surprised, more like something had just clicked into place. And his eyes, yes, they were the same ones I remembered from the witness stand 3 years ago. Steady, sincere. "I never forgot your ruling," he said, his voice so genuine it couldn't be faked. "You changed how I saw justice and how I saw myself in this work." The room wasn't silent, but in that moment, all I heard was the sound of my own heartbeat. My eyes drifted toward the far end of the hall. Chloe, standing among her friends, had turned. Her face had gone pale. My mother, near the entrance, gripped her wineglass tightly, frozen between shock and fear. I kept my eyes on Nathan and smiled gently. I think there's something you'll want to see, I said, slowly pulling a flat envelope from my purse. Plain white, no logo, no decoration, just thick paper, sealed tight. I handed it to him with both hands, firm but calm. Nynachan accepted it, opened it on the spot. Inside were 3 documents: a copy of the court ruling from the hospital lawsuit 3 years ago, a thank you letter from the community health center where he once worked, and a recognition certificate from the labor rights organization I'd partnered with. All with his name clearly listed as a key contributor. He flipped through them carefully, not rushing, not self-conscious. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. He looked up at me, his gaze deeper now. Not just admiration, but something more. A wordless connection. Between 2 people who once stood on opposite sides of justice, now meeting in shared purpose. Thank you, he said, voice hoarse. Not just for what you did, but for remembering it. I nodded. I never forgot, Nathan. Behind him, the energy in the room had shifted. A few people were starting to notice. Eyes were turning. Chloe had taken several steps closer, lips pressed tight, her expression weighed down by something unspoken. Was it fear, doubt, or the dawning realization of something she never wanted to confront? I said nothing more. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said was in that envelope. The rest was up to them, whether they still wanted to hide the truth or not. But I had already stepped out of the shadows of denial, and for the first time in this crowded room, I was truly seen. Not as someone's sister, not as the one who left, but as myself. A person whose past didn't need to be erased, whose work didn't need approval to be valid. Chloe couldn't stay still any longer. Her heels clapped sharply against the marble floor, each step a burst of fury. She marched toward us, golden hair now loose around her shoulders, her face stripped of its usual poise. And then, right there in the center of the grand hall, with over 100 people turning from their champagne and staring, she shouted, "When are you ruining my happiest day?" The whole room recoiled. The music stopped cold. I stood there, still holding my glass of water, eyes locked on the girl who once laughed as I left home, who once called me a disaster in disguise. Nathan turned too. He didn't flinch. He just waited a beat, then asked with chilling calm. My mother's voice was hushed with anger. "Why didn't you ever tell me Savannah was your sister?" That question hit like a slap. Chloe opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came. Her lips trembled. Her hand clenched her glittering clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every eye in the room turned to her. Yet no one stepped in to save her. No place to run, no curtain to drop. Just the truth, laid bare under the dazzling lights of a picture-perfect celebration. She stammered, "I didn't think that was necessary." Nathan took a step back. His face no longer held surprise, only disappointment, a quiet kind of disappointment that thickened the air around us. "Well, I think," he said slowly, clearly, "that if you felt keeping this from me wasn't important, then maybe we shouldn't continue at all." He took his phone from his pocket, quickly scrolling. Then, right there in the middle of the hall, he called the wedding planners. His voice was calm. "This is Nathan Reed. Yes, the wedding on the 24th. Cancel everything, immediately." Around us, whispers erupted like bubbles breaking the surface of boiling water. Chloe stood frozen, no longer able to hide anything. She turned, stumbling toward my mother, clinging to her as though caught in a wave. But my mother said nothing. She simply held Chloe's hand, looking up at me with eyes stripped of defenses. Not remorseful, no longer angry, just the empty gaze of someone who knew every curtain had been torn away. I said nothing. It wasn't necessary. News of what happened spread faster than any retelling could manage. By the next day, the elite social circles were abuzz. Some tried to distance themselves, others called directly to ask. Gossip spread like wind. The sister who was erased from the family. "She's a judge now, right? Who knew Chloe was hiding this?" Those seemingly harmless words carried something new. For the first time, they weren't using old nicknames. They started calling me by my name. A few days later, a judicial news website published an article titled, "The Woman Once Rejected Now Reshapes the System." Soon after, a public policy magazine reprinted an old interview with me, adding a footnote. Once rejected by her own family, she is now honored by the judicial community for lasting contributions. I didn't share that article, I didn't repost anything, but when I arrived at court the following morning, colleagues who had always maintained polite distance began approaching me. A paralegal smiled softly as I passed her in the hall, whispering, "You're not just our judge. You're proof justice can't be buried." I nodded slightly in return. I felt no joy, no celebration, just a strange sensation, as if something had finally settled into its proper place, not because I demanded it, but because it had always been mine. Springtime in Atlanta was just warm enough to wear a long-sleeved dress without a jacket. I stood backstage at the city's community hall, where the annual gala honoring Southern community contributors was held. A gentle voice announced, "Please welcome Federal Judge Savannah Monroe." I stepped onto the stage, soft lights tracing each step I took. The room wasn't grand or flashy like the events I'd been excluded from, but here every gaze was genuine. In the front rows sat workers in simple shirts, some I recognized from long, victorious legal battles. An older nurse who once wept at a hearing over pension cuts was there, along with young law students whose eyes lit up when I glanced their way. I walked up to the podium, standing tall. Beneath the black fabric of my evening dress, the silver pendant with the scales of justice shimmered softly below my collarbone. I touched it briefly as I took the microphone. A year ago, I was given the chance to serve as a federal judge in the Southern District, an opportunity that didn't come from family reputation or gold-plated invitations, but from people who believed in me when I didn't fully believe in myself. I paused briefly, took a breath, and continued, not loud, but firm and clear. I was once pushed out of my own family gatherings, called a traitor, labeled a failure, my name erased from every list, every letter, every proud story. But what they didn't realize is this: while they tried to remove me from my own story, I quietly rewrote it. Line by line, page by page. Clearer, stronger, and this time, entirely mine. The room was silent, not because no one wanted to applaud, but because everyone listened with their hearts. I looked around, not searching for familiar faces. My mother wasn't there, nor my father, nor any relatives. But I felt no absence. I saw Julia, who nearly lost her home due to an unfair lease. I saw Malik, the young man once denied legal help for lack of funds. I saw all the people I'd represented, not only through justice, but through my own existence. I didn't speak further about the past. I didn't recount who had hurt me. My presence here, among people who once shared the cold wooden benches of courtrooms with me, was my answer, not for revenge, but as proof. I was still here, needing neither permission nor forgiveness. After my speech, I stepped down from the podium, walking slowly along the rows. A little girl approached me, no older than 8, her hair tied in 2 ponytails with red ribbons. She stared up at me, eyes wide, and asked softly, "Are you the one who helped my mom keep our house?" I knelt to her eye level, nodded gently, smiling. "Maybe I am, if your mom once believed in justice." She hugged me quickly, then ran toward her mother, standing near the refreshment table. I stood up, watching them, feeling light as a morning breeze. No lengthy applause, no fireworks. But I had something I once thought was lost forever, a rightful place in the story I had written with my own hands, once trembling, now steady. Maybe every family has silences no one dares touch, words left unspoken, wounds nobody admits. But I believe each of us has the right to rewrite our own story, even if it starts in silence, even if we must walk alone. I don't know what you've gone through with your family. Perhaps you've also been misunderstood, excluded from a gathering you deserved to attend. Or perhaps you're holding on to an unanswered question, a pain that doesn't yet have a name. But if there's one thing I've learned from everything I've been through, it's this: we don't need anyone's permission to stand up for ourselves. If my story made you think about yourself or about someone you've quietly watched from afar, please leave your thoughts below. I genuinely want to hear from you. And if you'd like to keep following me through other slices of family life, moments that seem small but shape who we become, please subscribe to the channel, because behind every door that appears peaceful, there's always a story worth hearing, and I still have so much more to share with you.